I'm Ian McIlwee and I'm Chief Exec of the trade body FIS. We look after the fit out and the finishing trades within the construction sector, and within that, the dry lining and SFS sectors, which I know are dear to the hearts of Cineac.
Good morning, Ian. My name is Nigel Morrey. I'm Technical Director of ETEX Building Performance. I've been in this role for 9 years. Prior to that, I was in the passive fire protection sector, working for the ETEX organisation. Within this organisation here, we have two principal brands. We have the Cineac dry lining brand and the ProMat passive fire protection brands.
Nigel, thanks for welcoming me here today. The reason for this discussion and the webinar we're hosting is because Cineac made a fairly bold announcement earlier in the year about taking design responsibilities for the systems that you're placing on the market. Today's all about getting behind that headline and really starting to understand what that means to the supply chain and how that's going to help improve the marketplace. First thing I think is to understand the difference between design liability and design responsibility contractually, and I wondered if you could comment on that.
Well, I think the first point I'd make is really we don't have a contractual responsibility here, okay? What really we have and what we've looked at quite carefully is the issue of the responsibilities that we'd have when under the Construction Design and Management Regulations and the Building Safety Act. If you look at the definitions of design, if you look at the definitions of designer, it's quite clear that the actions that we take in terms of producing specifications for our clients would constitute as design. So as such, we don't actually carry professional indemnity insurance. That is something where you have a paid design service. We have an insurance called professional liability, and that covers for our unpaid design services.
Yeah, so you've really looked at the building regulations, that part 2A, and said we've got principal contractor, principal designer, in this case designer, to really understand what the responsibility of the designer is and how you can help.
Absolutely. And we fundamentally believe that this is the right thing to do. I think there's a lot of concern with regard to design responsibility or design liability. I think the two terms are quite interchangeable within the industry. And as I said, I don't think we've taken a bold step. I think we've taken the responsible step to accept our responsibility and our appropriately our liability.
I think that responsible word is going to come up throughout
Absolutely.
So, I'm going to fire into the next question, if that's okay.
Fine.
But what's the difference? Because we have warranties in the marketplace. How's what you're doing here different?
The way I'd best explain that is when you talk about warranties, it's typically warranties around a product, and that could be a plasterboard, or a system, and that's where that plasterboard is combined with other components to give a system performance. But really, it's that the warranties around that particular element itself. With construction, what we do, we bring elements together, and the critical area really is the interfacing of those. And so, really, the step we have taken is taking responsibility for the design of the interfacing of the individual elements of construction there. That's the fundamental difference. And I'm sure, Ian, you've been in many a meeting when people have talked about the problem they have with the interfaces in construction. And that's where we're spending our time now in terms of developing our interface solutions.
I think it's a perennial problem for us. What's the product? What's the system? What's the component? How do they come together? And who's taking responsibility for that? So again, I think anything that's moving that forward, driving that conversation is a really good thing. I'm going to draw you back just as if we take like the specific Cineac lifetime warranty. Again, so would you still be offering a Cineac lifetime warranty, or does this work alongside or instead of? And how do those two interplay?
No, absolutely. I see them fundamentally as two different offerings to the marketplace. They both have their place there, and they're both needed. As I say, with regard to the lifetime warranty, that relates to the product and to the components which go into the system, and saying that product and those components form a system, and that will actually last the lifetime of the building itself. As I said, really the key thing with the design liability is when you bring the different elements together, when you bring the ceiling to the wall, or the wall to a floor detail, or it could be the structural openings within a building. When you bring those components together and you interface those, that's where we're taking responsibility, the design liability for those critical interfaces. And it's the interface themselves which is critical in terms of the overall system performance. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into some of the nitty gritty now, Nigel. If we look at the design process as it applies to the dry lining system, there's lots of different ways that's currently applied in the marketplace. We'll get a principal contractor designing the wall system. We might get the main contractor with a novated or assuming design responsibility, providing that design completion work. We might get the specialist subcontractor doing it. we might get a independent consultant who could be appointed by any one of those three parties. So it is quite there's not a clear design development process as it applies to dry lining at the moment. And then we get that issue where people are asked to comment on the design, and particularly in contracts, we see quite onerous clauses which ask people to take responsibility for the compliance of a design, which again is designed by stealth, right? So if we look at this process, contractors, if we take that design by stealth thing, contractors are often asked to comment on a customer's drawing and details. How do you see that changing in the context of the new process you're offering? Will they still be able to comment? Will they still need to comment? Will they still need to provide that type of
Yes, I think design is something which develops on a scheme. I think we work very closely with you've highlighted there a number of different parties and a number of different ways in which design can be dealt with. We deal with all that at various stages of the contract, and we'll always try our utmost to provide best support and best guidance to every one of those parties. I think with everything, though, we sometimes have to say no. There are sometimes scenarios that come to us where the proposal is unacceptable. It technically will not work. And in those instances, we would always try and come up with an alternative solution to overcome a particular design problem. I think what we try and do as well now in terms of our development programs, we look to test more systems. We look to test more interface type details. So hopefully now more and more we have the solutions to actually overcome those particular challenges. But I think it's important that we try and standardize as much as possible, and we try and take away from the variability of trying to design on the construction site. More and more now we should be designing before we get to site, before we actually face the site problems.
It's that word responsible again came out there. So one of the things we talk about at FIS is that responsible no. And I think in sort of the case of this, it's not so much about commenting on design. It's just making sure that you have the competence to provide the right kind of input at the right time. So in this case, I'm thinking where a manufacturer providing design detail, the comment should be validated, checked with you before they maybe pass it to the client, or how should the flow of that?
I think you need to look at how we act as a manufacturer now. Very much we produce systems, and those systems are fully tested. But I think systems are only as good as the people that actually represent you in the marketplace. That's both in terms of your specification teams and your technical teams. I think I'm very proud that within Discipline Performance over the last 4 years now, we've pushed very hard the competency agenda. We've subscribed very heavily to the ASFP training on passive fire protection and also the IFE Level 3 qualification. And I have nearly 40 colleagues now within this business. So this is another reason now we can actually go live with design liability at this site, because we have products, we have systems, but we have the people with the right competence to understand how those products and how those systems should be properly used and properly promoted in the marketplace. Very, very critical. And I think this is one of the major weaknesses, is the question with regard to competence within this sector. And it's something that we as eTechs pride ourselves in terms of how we're developing the competence pathways for our employees to the benefit of our clients.
Again, competence is such a key part now of the new regulations. So people have to be able now to demonstrate competence.
It's something that we've looked at. It's developing. What we're able to do now, we're able to offer company competence statements, where we're working on specific projects, where we have one of our specification managers there. We're able to provide competence statements for the individual. That's based on the training we provide. We provide regulatory training. We have an online technical expert program for SINIAT, which all our staff have to complete, and they do the IFE Level 3 qualification. And the key thing is having the practical understanding of how products come together. We're fortunate here at Bristol. We have our training centre, and we have a range of drywall courses which are available to our employees there. So we build the picture. This competence is not just about the one qualification. It's a picture that we build. It's a picture that we're extending on at the present time there. And so this again, as I said earlier, this links back into about why have we gone live with design liability responsibility now? It's because it's the right thing to do for the industry. but we're confident in what we do because of the work we've done in terms of product development, system development, but really critical is people development. And we have a very strong, competent team of people to support the drywall sector.
So it's very much putting some rigor around just this process, isn't it? If somebody's offering advice, there's a facility, a support available now through Cineat that adds rigor to that process. And if a company's providing their own competence, this is a subcontractor, if they're providing their own competency statement, if using a Cineat system backed up by this service, this is part of that. How they're going to validate the information, how they validate any advice they're providing will be through and supported by Cineat.
I think, the principal designer's got the responsibility to ensure that the whole design team has got adequate competence. We're one small part of that. But I think as long as everyone does their part, that does build the overall picture and does give the whole design process that level of robustness, which we know has been sorely missing for many, many years.
Can you give us a feel for the process, how it works with Cineat, the design process, from who first contacts you, what happens as you move through the various stages until you spit out at the end a completed design?
Good question again. I think who contacts us, it can be anyone from the design community. It can be a principal architect, it can be just a project architect, it can be the in-house design team from a main contractor or a design team from a subcontractor. Could be a fire engineer direct. So there's multiple people who actually contact us. But I think the key thing for us really is to start to gather the information coming in. We'll often go back and look for more information. We're trying to get as much information as possible, and we start to actually pull the scheme together. So how we actually do that, typically once we've had that initial contact, we will then send in one of our specification managers. They will go and talk to that particular party. That conversation might then broaden out and go to various design meetings, depending on where the project is. It could be off-site or on-site meetings then. And we produce an item called a project pack. And this is all the Cineat designs are in there, all the interfacing details, etc. So all the details you would need as a subcontractor to actually build the project.
And you'll do all sort of the RFIs in that process?
Yes, yeah. Well, typically there would be RFI at that stage then. There could be a lot of connection between the specification team members and other design partners. They'd also be talking to my tech services team. My tech services team will be drawing upon my technical development team. So there's information flow to bring this design together. So the specification manager would produce a project pack. That project pack would then come into my technical services process. It then goes through a two-stage checking process then, and then that would then be issued out. It has a unique project pack number, which is unique to that particular project, and it has a revision number, okay? So as the scheme develops, and sometimes revision A could be the as-built design, but often it's a case where at various stages during the design, items change. There could be different partition systems required, certain partition systems removed. So as we go through it, at various stages, we issue revisions. They're alphanumeric revisions that are issued out there, okay? So that's really that stage of it. We then often get asked a lot of questions now in terms of our competence, particularly around the competence of the company to work within this sector, and we've produced company competence statements. We also ask very much about the competence of the individual who has produced the project pack there. And again, we will refer to our regulatory training, to our Cineat learner management system. We'll refer to the ASFP training, the IFE level 3 qualification, and the practical training that they've done down our training centre. So we build those statements together. More recently, we've been asked now specifically to produce designer competency statements. Quite a leap forward for us because obviously, we are, as we say, implicitly a designer. So now, again, this is really going through each aspect of the design itself and making clear statements to really qualify why we believe that we are competent to provide that level of design up to the principal designer. So that it is multifaceted. Two projects are never the same. But I think what we have got is that ability to service that irrespective of where the request's from and the nature of the request. we've now developed a process in-house to service that. So it's very much an iterative process.
And just moving on to the construction industry, where things seldom go 100% to plan. If something happens on a construction site, we encounter something where it's difficult to fix or there's a column where we didn't expect it to be. How do you manage the change process?
We manage the change process. Again, we have drywall site technicians who will go on site. We also now have construction support managers who go onto site, and they will go on site. They'll meet with the subcontractor or possibly the main contractor and review those details. They will then bring back scenarios in terms of how we can overcome the problem. Those scenarios will be assessed by our tech services team and also by our development team to see whether we can support those. If what's being suggested is we can't support it, we will try and come up with an alternative way of fixing it. In most cases, we can find a workaround. There are occasionally cases that we have to say no, and we will say no if we fundamentally believe that what has been installed or what's been proposed to be installed will not meet the specified requirements. We have to say no in those instances.
Responsible no again. And just finally on that, buildability issues are often a problem. The design looks great on paper, but in the real world, it's difficult to get somebody in to build that. Are you finding through this process that you can offer more guidance around safe installation?
We have, as I said, a training centre here at Bristol, and before we launch any new product or system, we do all the buildability trials. So yes, the answer is yes. We will find a way that a system can be built. Sometimes we would design a system, and then we come to the practical application. We find fundamentally we have to change the design because what we've designed from a practical standpoint, you can't physically build, or it's difficult to build. Or using our expertise in our training centre, we can find better ways of doing it. Okay,
but that's a responsibility that you're supporting through your design.
Absolutely. All the while, we need to, look at systems that will work, but we also need to look at systems that you can actually build on site.
What's the internal process for, say, issuing sketches, doing hand drawings to assist customers in the design process? Are you still able to do this? Are contractors still able to do this?
Yes. We still offer a full support services, and what I call the traditional support services, where we'll be past design. I think the days of the hand sketches have gone to a greater degree. I think much more now we're seeing CAD details and we're responding with CAD details. But yes, we receive those. We will comment on those, and again, by commenting on someone else's design, we are implicitly taking design responsibility there. But I think the key thing for us now is we have a what we call our project pack tool. So when we work on a major project, we produce a specification, and we fully accept that over a period of time, specifications develop. And so we issue unique specifications at a point in time, and that process continues through the whole design process. Because the critical thing really at this stage now, we all talk about Gateway 2 is getting a robust design for approval by the Building Safety Regulator before construction starts. But we mustn't forget, at that Gateway 2, we talk about what we're planning to build. And then at Gateway 3, we actually talk about what we actually have built. So what we're able to do now is to feed that continuum of information down through that design process. Because no matter how much we design off-site, we fully know that when you get on site, there will be scenarios which have to be dealt with there. The other change we've made now, in terms of our SINIAT support structure, our technical support structure, we've divided the team. So we have the team who work on the primary specification, and we have a second team who work on the construction, the REBA design stage 5. So really on site, coming up to the practical, understanding the practical issues that are on site there and the scenarios and coming up with solutions. And gradually what we want to do is to identify more and more of the common problems, the pinch points, the pain points for the subcontractor, and really take those back into our development teams, develop solutions, and be able to offer those solutions up front. So more and more now, we'll take greater control of the specification away from the construction site. But this will take time, but that's our direction of travel.
Yeah, so really what you're starting to lay out is a more controlled and consistent design process. again, if we look at sort of information management in construction, we had sort of product data templates which tell us everything we need to know about a product, or should tell us everything we need to know about a product. But we've never really had a consistent information management process that's allowed a consistent exchange of information between the various parties, where we've very clearly defined the roles of principal designer, and also where the limitations of the designer's role is. And so is that something you're starting to see is as you sort of venture into this space, more clarity about what the role of the designer actually is when it comes to driving?
I think it's something we have to lead in ourselves. I think we have to state our position for the industry. Often when I'm talking to architects, they sort of say, we accept the fact you're only producing drywall, but when you look at drywall, it's probably the largest part of your passive fire protection system within a modern building. And I think, yes, we are taking a greater lead. We are trying to take out the variables. We are looking at the areas which have been a concern, and we are testing those. I think one of our challenges at the present time is some of the capability we have within the UK to test. We have limitations, and whilst this business has responsibility for UK and Ireland, our actual test programs operate all over Europe, and we'll test, particularly, say for example, twin wall systems, shaft wall systems, which fall outside of the scope of the extension documents. We will tool wall test these at laboratories over Europe. So we are gap filling at the present time, and gradually, as we fill those gaps, we'll move more of those into our standard solutions there, and then it will just make the life for the designer easier, because we'll be able to evidence quite clearly through tests, through extension, through classification, exactly what systems they are able to use with the confidence of it being classified by an independent third party.
And that's certainly been a challenge for the sector. The design freedom that the architect has, it's setting those engineering constraints at an earlier stage, so that we're not left with a deflection that we can't accommodate, or too late for the dry lining system to accommodate the level of deflection that the architect's allowed for, or nobody's matched up the tolerances, or nobody's thought about how the tolerances line up.
I think that's a good point, Ian. I think really, we have a responsibility to try and find out more earlier in the process. I think we do have a strong knowledge. We build our knowledge from project to project. But now we actively seek more information, because we strongly believe that the better the information we have, the better the solution we can provide, and then that starts to eliminate, the problems which potentially could occur on site. But I think often we are now asking the questions where no one's thought about those things before. So we are prompting earlier in the design process.
Well, they have thought about them, but they're thinking about them, solving them in the project, moving on, solving them in the project, moving on, and we sort of we bulldoze over our problems, don't we? We kind of solve them in the project, and there's another project, and it's all happening so fast that we're not capturing things outside of the project maybe enough up to now, so that we can actually systemically solve them.
I think what we're trying to do as well now, we're trying to recognise where are these common pinch points, and there's not always black and white. There are areas of grey, and we have to adjudicate on grey, and we have to take technical decisions. That's what we're doing. We bring those in house. We actually we decide what our standard answer is, and we build that, and we communicate out that to the marketplace. So all the while we're trying to eliminate variability. We're trying to standardise as much as possible, so it makes it simpler for the designer, the main contractor, the subcontractor, or any other specialist, because what they've got a definitive set of rules, of guidelines which you can use within the drywall sector.
So it's back to that consistency of process, the right information at the right time. I think we'll come back to information in a second, but something that I know frustrates everyone in the construction industry is contracts and the legal bits and all that little bit of small print that we see hidden away, and caveated details, right? Why, when Cineat are taking design responsibility, why do we still have caveated tested details? Why do we still see caveats at the bottom of emails saying, please ensure that any technical details we provide are checked and approved by the project architects and other relevant third parties prior to construction? But if Cineat are taking responsibility, why do we need to caveat it?
I think it's a good question, that, and I'm often challenged at that. Why do we still have that? I think first of all, you have to realise that everything has its limitations. And that's one of the reasons we do classification of our tested systems. We use an independent party to define quite clearly what you can and can't do in terms of the scope of that system there. So everything has a limitation. I think then in terms of that statement with regard to the project architect checking the details, you must understand that often we only see a small part of the overall specification. We're provided a level of detail, and we provide a design around that level of detail that's been provided to us. There might be other factors outside that which we're not aware of, but the principal designer and the main design team would be aware of it. So that's the reason for that. Just flagging up. You need to check that particular detail to make sure that is right in the context of your overall project, of your overall scheme there. It's just really flagging it. It's not, I don't think it's trying to avoid our responsibilities. I think we're taking a responsible position by actually flagging that. You need to check it yourself to make sure you're happy with that. And of course, if there's something wrong or whatever, or there's a concern, we come back and we go back into that design process. That's not a problem for us at all, okay?
And again, it's that difference between design coordination and design within the project. Those two things have to work together. And again, I think one of the challenges we have is that the design coordination process often seems to be just do that, and there's not much. I think one of the numbers we looked at, or one of the pieces of research we did with Reading University, looking at the design development process, is how often people, when they're trying to seek clarification in their design elements, aren't ever hearing back from the principal designer, and effectively the program just rolls over and something gets done. And I think that's kind of the thing that we need to avoid, and where again a greater focus on process and reminding people what their responsibilities are does need to be ingrained in the process.
And I think that you can argue that's what our caveats and our drawings are. It's reminding them of their responsibility. They have to check to make sure they have the overall responsibility. We can design based on what we know, but if there are factors that we don't know, that could have impaired or negate our design.
I think that's an interesting point to drill into as well, because you're a few months in, 4 or 5 months now since you launched, and so you're starting to see this new process unfold in the business. Are you finding that the information that you're having to ask for is different or more onerous? Are you asking for more information than you previously used to get? Are you seeing a big difference between the type of information you're being given in order to support the process now?
I think certainly we have to be more inquiring. We have to perhaps lift the stones that possibly in the past we wouldn't have lifted. I think certainly in terms of what's expected of us now, the amount of information that we have to provide to support the design has stepped up massively. In terms of the provision of classification reports, we've now put our classification reports there. They're online. They're all available through MBS now, and those classifications specifically reference back to the individual systems. So from a design standpoint, you can see a CINIAT system reference, and you can see the exact classification that stands behind that. That is a really critical point. I think there's still
like a clear. So what I'm thinking here is that before you're able to undertake the design, say we've got a project that's into stage 3.
Yep.
And is that typically where you're starting to get the interactions at sort of a stage 3 design?
Stage 3 is moving more into stage 4.
So is there like a clear starting point for you to say, once we've got all this information, we can start doing our design? Are you finding that upfront requirement is getting clearer?
The information we are receiving now is better. I do think already we're seeing other parties in the design chain taking greater responsibility now. So yeah, definitely we're seeing better information. But I think equally we are more confident now to actually challenge more and to push back and say we cannot provide design until we get this level of information. So we're having a much stronger interaction now with that design team, which I believe is bringing out a much improved design, which is a good thing to see. But certainly, there is challenge. We're not finished article yet. There's more work that needs to be done by all parties in this design process to really strengthen design.
So again, if we jump into some of the specifics of, through wall is often an area that creates a lot of challenge in the sector. So customers on projects, will they require a separate through wall warranty on projects incorporating like the Regamin Cineac ProMat systems?
Yeah, we still offer our system warranties. So where you're using ProMat, Cineat, and Remagine SFS, we offer a warranty on that. Some of the things we've been working on this year is really the interface testing there, because one of the big challenges is bringing your SFS systems up through your structural protection board up to your primary steel members there. It's great if everything lines up and it comes directly underneath it, but often we have offset scenarios there. And again, we've now done all our testing in terms of both direct, but also offset fastening there. And that's where it gives us the confidence to offer design liability cover for those scenarios there. But I think there's lots more areas that we've identified already that are critical interfaces, and this is something in terms of our current development program, which we're actually working on, looking at, I think one particular area is glazed screens, and putting glazed screens to drywall systems. Sometimes these are absolutely huge, these screens, and they completely take away from the drywall system itself. Again, that's another area of development. So I think we've come a long way. We're on a journey. We're not at the end of the journey yet, but I think we've got a clear direction of travel, and I strongly believe that we are addressing some long historical issues that have sat within the drywall sector.
And again, that's interesting when we start looking at the design liability when we're talking about third-party components. So if we jump into some specifics, because we've had some questions through in advance of this, but does the design liability statement from Cineat cover FSI when you add their details to your project pack?
Absolutely. If you have a situation where we have added an FSI product into our Cineat system design, absolutely we take design responsibility for that. And the same goes for if it's a component we've integrated into our system from a third party as well. We take responsibility for that performance of that particular component as part of that design itself. However, there's a limitation. We don't take responsibility for the complete design of someone else's wall, but particularly what we're focusing on is how those interface together, because we can take responsibility for how those two come together. The performance of another person's system per se, we can't comment on that.
So interfacing and to an extent compatibility requirements you can pick up, but
Correct.
Not necessarily the performance of the product that's going in.
Correct.
So if we use a specific example, you mentioned the glazed partition issue, but the compatibility of glazed partitions. How about if we look sort of at things like doors, for example, because that often causes problems in specifications where the doors are thought about too late and there's weight issues of door systems. How does a door work within a Cineat designed system?
We would take responsibility for the structural sufficiency of the structural opening itself. So we have opening designs for doors, and that'll be based on certain door skin weights there. Okay.
Yeah.
So we would take responsibility of that particular opening. Would say, for example, be sufficient to carry a door leaf of 120 kgs, for example. How that actual door leaf is actually installed into the system very much comes down to the manufacturer of the door, but we're more than happy to talk to and work with the manufacturer of the doors. And I suppose another scenario would be, quite a contentious one, is dampers and the use of dampers within drywall systems. We work very closely with the damper manufacturers in terms of how we bring dampers into drywall systems, because often you've got a damper standard and you've got a non-load bearing partition standard, and we work with the manufacturers and we do joint testing with the manufacturers how these components come together. I think with dampers there's relatively few damper manufacturers. With doors there's a lot of door manufacturers out there. It's difficult to work with everyone, but certainly on a particular project we're more than happy to engage in design conversations with whoever's been specified as door provider to come up with the appropriate arrangements. Okay, and what we have here at our training centre here in Bristol, We're able to do mock-ups as well. So again, on particular projects, we can do mock-ups, we can do installation, detailing, etc. And that's something we can do to help the overall project design.
Yeah, so again, if we draw that back to the specifics, it's you're not doing the coordination, but you can provide advice and guidance to support that coordination process.
Absolutely, and this is what we do all the while. We're often talking to a range of different construction product manufacturers about how they introduce and interface their products into our systems. Now, if it's a one-off, we tend to be a desktop type study we do inside. But again, we have the ability to test these systems. We're fortunate we have our own test facilities operated by Warrington Fire. We have an extensive ongoing development program which is running continuously, and scenarios like this we can look into and we can provide tested solutions. Because I think the critical thing what the market is looking for test evidence of performance, and this is something we're looking at building our portfolio of test evidence all the while. Not just in terms of fire. Obviously, fire is very topical, very, very critical, but really looking at probably a lot about the structural sufficiency of systems now. So it is the ability of openings to carry to carry doors, to carry glazed screens there, looking at the robustness of systems, looking at the duty rated systems, looking at the duty rating of tall barriers, of tall walls up to 5 meters. So these are sort of the gap filling areas that we're now working on to build that portfolio. And again, it just helps us. It gives more confidence in terms of taking that responsibility for design that we've taken now.
That's really interesting, Nigel. If we look, so again, let's take another scenario because it's always helpful to sort of use examples here. So if we take, for example, an external wall interface. So we'll look at we'll move outside for a minute, get a bit of fresh air. In terms of the details you'll take responsibility for, how about if it's another manufacturer's SFS stud and sheathing board?
Yeah, I'll go somewhere slightly different. We had a case with glazed external walling this year, where we had to bring a Ciniac partition system up to that external system there. And in that design, there was a third-party fire stopping product. So what we then did, we worked with the main contractor, the developer, and we worked with the specialist subcontractor, and we actually tested that solution. So wherever possible, we will actually test those interface solutions and to overcome that. And again, by having that tested evidence there, absolutely we can warrant that situation because we can clearly defend its position there. But again, where we are working with other SFS manufacturers, in terms of their particular system performance, that's for them to define their system performance. But where, say, another SF manufacturer's products interface with a Ciniac system, we're happy to warrant that detail there. So I think the key thing is about we're warranting the interfacing. We're obviously warranting the performance of our Ciniac element, but we cannot warrant the performance of the third party construction. That comes down to third party to warrant that particular element of it.
Is the answer always to test, or are you able to make assessments, engineering assessments?
I think ideally we should always test. Ideally, we should always then classify, and we should actively promote classification to the marketplace. The beauty of classification is an independent party assesses your test evidence and gives you quite clearly the scope of what you can and can't do. It takes away from the ambiguity of interpretation of the test evidence. I think we have to accept, though, construction's construction, and there will always be cases where we cannot test. And in those cases there, I think first thing you should look to do, there might not be a standard test method, but can you develop a bespoke test method, which we do, to actually look at a particular scenario and provide evidence of performance and compatibility. That's something we do quite commonly. I think there will always be the need for assessments. I think we had the PFPF guidance, the Passive Fire Protection Federation guidance for fire tests, assessments based on fire tests. As you're probably aware, that document is currently sitting with BSI, and that's now been converted to British Standard. And we're probably 18 months, 2 years away before we have that. There is always a need for an assessment of some form out there. there will always be a lag between the development of product standards and system testing to the rate at which we innovate design and construction there. So we need to have assessment, but used appropriately and following sound engineering judgments. The days of the desktop study, the engineering judgment, everything is going to be based on primary test evidence.
And that's again, it's about clear process, isn't it? How do we make an assessment? There's a clear, robust process that makes sure that we've done all that's reasonable to ensure that we're bringing something safely to market. So let's jump forward now, because we've talked about the process. We talked about some of the details within the process. What happens if it all goes wrong? So we're in now a world where there's a claim, right? Something has gone wrong. How do claims and liabilities occur under this new offering from Cineat in the absence of the direct contractual relationship between you
and that's the critical thing? We don't have a direct contractual relationship with typically the main contractor or the subcontractor. I think typically, we would want the subcontractor or the main contractor to raise that concern, that situation with us. We need to be notified. We need to be notified in reasonable time. We need to be given access to investigate and report back. So, my view is very clear. You let us know as a business. You tell us, that there's a potential. You register that with us, and then we would carry out the necessary investigation and report back accordingly. I think for me, taking this, you can talk about a leap. Was it a leap, or was it the next step in our development as an organisation? And I take it as the next step. And I come back to the work that we've been doing over the last 5 years within the Cineat business, completely retesting all our systems, completely eliminating BS. And as we know, the British standard testing for fire resistance is not due to expire until early September 2029. We've basically gone 4 years ahead of what will be the statutory requirements there. So I think with us now is about having your products. We've invested very heavily in new manufacturing facilities, new process. 98% of our products are now manufactured within the UK. Having all our system testing, and then linking that into your people development, your competence development. As I said already, we have nearly 40 people with the IFE Level 3 qualification. We have a further 18 people in training at the present time. So when you link those blocks together, it is not a major leap to take on this design liability, because it's just to my mind, it's a natural follow-on, because you've got your robustness of process of product, robustness of process system testing, and your robustness of your competence processes there. That you are eliminating, you are de-risking your business, okay?
Yeah.
To get to this point here.
So product process people. That's at the heart of all FISS. But I'm going to press you a little bit on the processes of what happens if there's a claim. So does Cineat have professional indemnity insurance?
No, we don't have professional indemnity insurance. I work quite closely with our group legal people, with our group risk managers and insurers, and we have. And we consider professional indemnity insurance is something where you actually have paid design responsibility. Clearly, we don't have paid design responsibility, as you've already alluded to. We don't have a direct contractual relationship. What we actually provide is unpaid design support, which is typical for anyone who's in the specification business. Now, within our public and product liability insurance, we also carry professional liability cover, and professional liability cover provides cover for any errors that we would make in providing unpaid design advice there. So we do have cover, but not that traditional way of professional indemnity. This professional liability cover.
So, and I think that's a really important to draw out. Is again, we talked about the different people who might have responsibility for the design of the subcontract package, dry lining. If a subcontractor has signed a contract, a contracted design portion, for example, then they would still need to hold their professional indemnity insurance.
Absolutely. Our professional liability insurance is not in lieu of, it's in addition to. It's providing that additional level of support to the subcontractor. But as you say, if the subcontractor has taken on design liability and has got design responsibility, they should be having appropriate professional indemnity cover based on the size and scope of the scheme.
And then the situation here we're looking at is, we're back to the worst case scenario. It's all gone to hell in a handcart. But if there was a claim, then effectively they would notify their insurance, but there would be a contingent liability on their insurance, and the claim would effectively pass through to Syniat.
Yes, exactly that, and no doubt, the loss adjusters of the third party insurers would be contacting our insurers and our loss adjusters, and the loss adjusters will be getting together and dealing with the matter. Yeah.
But again, I think for the specialist subcontractors that may be listening to this, it's important to discuss this relationship with their professional indemnity insurance providers so that their professional indemnity insurance provider understands how they're abdicating their design responsibility. And that may affect premium in a positive way, right?
Positively. Yeah. I think if, with a specialist subcontractor talking to their insurer or to their broker and explaining that they are working with Syniat and that Syniat does take design responsibility for what they provide. And I think the fact that Syniat does carry professional liability cover, and again, it's a cover note that we provide to support that statement, I think that gives that level of comfort to them. And again, I think that there is potential there for reduction in professional indemnity premiums. Yes, I agree.
But again, I think the important thing to stress there, or to really draw out there, is to make sure that the level that they're taking is equivalent to the level that you're covering.
Yes.
And I think that's then comes back to being very clear about what the scope of the design that you're covering and therefore they can cover. And that comes back a little bit to that responsible no, doesn't it? When we're being pressed to take responsibility for details that are typically outside of our control or outside of our competence, we've got a very clear scope that we can work within, that we can design within. And there's very clearly things that we can't allow for this late in the programme.
I'm very clear about that it's a mantra within this business. Whatever we put to paper, whatever we say, we genuinely believe that if that product or that system was tested in that configuration, it would meet the stated performance. We don't ever say yes.
Yeah.
To win the project. We will always say no, but the no will say, no, we cannot do that. However, let's look at the scheme, let's look what we can do, and we'll work closely together and back to the drawing board. We'll work closely with the specialist subcontractors, whether it's structural engineers, fire engineers, whoever, and we'll come up with scenarios. In times it could be a case then we've got to go back out of classification, back to primary test evidence, look at the test reports themselves and working with the fire engineers to work our way around it. So we'll always try and come up with a solution. But if the answer is no, the answer is no. And that's absolutely clear. That's our position. We don't say yes to win.
And again, I think that benefits, because again, in grey area, people get bullied in the grey areas, don't they? When things aren't black and white, they're not clear, it becomes easy to push that risk, to squeeze people down the supply chain. But if we have got clear statements of responsibility, clear scope set by the manufacturers, it should become easier to manage that design liability that's often creeped outside of what we really should be assuming within the supply chain.
As we've taken on design, responsibility, and we have our design liability statement, we have to be quite clear what we do. We have to manage that, and we have to manage the risk associated with that. Mm. So absolutely, anything that is contentious, that would ultimately come to my desk, and I would take the ultimate arbitration of whether we did something or not. But in most cases, if the answer is no, we will go back and we'll find there is normally a workaround. It's much easier to do a workaround on the drawing board than on the construction site. So the more information we have during that design phase, so almost your detailed design REBA stage 4, and we work out the redesign at that point, rather than we're standing on site, REBA stage 5, on the construction site and looking at the problem there. It's much better to solve the problem on the drawing board than on the construction side, as you will know.
As we were talking earlier before we started, it's the last minute risk assessment. It's the things that happen at the last minute where most of the liability will end up sitting, and we've got to have contingent processes and.
But I think as we've talked before, it's about, where is the balance? We talk about the 80-20 or the 50-50. And probably at the present time, too much sits in, we'll sort that when we get to site. What we're trying to do in terms of particularly the way we've restructured our technical service department now is that we have a team of people who work on the construction site. So we're trying to identify those pinch points, those pain points out there, and taking those away from the construction site, bringing that into our development teams and developing the solutions. So we're trying to shift the balance, and more the standardized solutions are delivered through our project pack tool there. So there's less and less decisions you have to make on site because more and more of that design has been done already, and you've got to follow that design. But I think one of the critical things here as well, whilst we're taking, design liability, I think I would flag in terms of the responsibility of the subcontractor and the main contractor in terms of making sure that the systems as designed and as specified are installed properly. And that is always the concern. This is often raised to me, is this about the installed system? I can't go that stage there because I don't take responsibility for the actual installation itself per se. So I think it's really important that the subcontractor and the main contractor really look at their processes and procedures in terms of their checking process, their QA, to make sure the systems that have been designed with our input are actually installed correctly on site there. Because clearly, if a system is installed incorrectly, that negates our design liability.
Yeah, I think that point of 50-50 is a really important one, isn't it? Because often the world talks about the 80-20 rule, but the reality, I think, in our sector at the moment is it probably is a 50-50 rule. That 50% is comfortably doable within the systems that are readily available, and 50% is we're having to work out how to accommodate designs that maybe didn't provide the best opportunity to use the systems. And I wonder if that's something that we'll get from the process that you're adopting, is how quickly it will go from 50-50 to 60-40, and we start to set those engineering constraints more effectively.
I genuinely think there are a series of common problems that are, we regularly hear about on sites now. So I think there are a series of common issues that we can address, we can develop, and we can create standard solutions. There'll always be an element of design on the construction site. I think the nature of construction always is. It's a fascinating process, and no matter how much you think you've got it right, there's always something which occurs there. And again, I think what we will do is having our line 2 team there will give us much greater ability to support those particular site-based issues there. But as we said before, what we must do, we must take the site issues, create standardized solutions, and build those standardized solutions. And more, we want people to build in a standardized manner, because standardization will give you consistency and will give you quality of build and certainty of performance in the event of a significant event on site, whether that be fire or something else.
We talked a little bit earlier, just to you made me think there, we talked a little bit earlier about the information. You've got clear information requirements, which is, again, starting to help to standardise. Are you starting to find your conversations are happening a little bit earlier in the process?
Oh, definitely. I think definitely when I came to this business a few years ago, I think a lot of the conversation were more sort of main contractor, tier 1 contractor led. I think certainly now we're spending a lot more time probably higher up the stream talking to the architect now. And I think it's an interesting dynamic, isn't it, in terms of traditional contract form, architect driven versus design and build now. And I think if anything, you could argue the case that is what's happening with regard to Gateway 2 and is this the end of design and build? I think it's more of a reset rather than the end. And I think that the architect will play a much stronger role. So I think the hand of the architect has got stronger now. Yeah. So absolutely, we spend a lot more time talking with the architect now, at that earlier stage, rather than working more with the tier one and down to the subcontract stage. Definitely, there's a movement. I call the movement upstream in terms of the design process.
Because again, it's weird, isn't it? We talk about the design process, but it's actually the design processes, isn't it? Because it will depend very much on the type of project, the type of contract, and if we move out of, say, the high-rise residential into that fast fit-out commercial sector where design and build tends to predominate, I think it's that design process. It's separating the conceptual design from the technical design piece, isn't it? And I think that's where we're seeing the shift, is that technical design piece is starting to get a little bit better structured in terms of the way it's delivered. And it almost doesn't matter whether that's been done by the architect or the principal contractor as a design innovation. But
I think when you look at the situation now, and obviously with the tragic outcomes of the Grenville fire, there's been this massive refocus around fire. I think for many years we'd deregulated, we'd lost our focus on fire. Fire deaths were reducing all the while. We've had this reset now, and now there's massive focus around fire again, which is the right thing, but also around structural sufficiency, and often the two come hand in hand. It's around your ADB and your ADA in terms of structural sufficiency. So again, and this is one of the great things that we have at Cineat, is that we work so closely with our partner Promat. Because often, particularly if you say high-rise multi-residential, it's steel frame buildings, so the primary hot roll frame needs to be protected. So we're working, on Promat on those types of specifications there. Then obviously when we've got to bring in the infill drywall systems there, that's where obviously you're then linking between your Promat and your Cineat on the internals. Then when you come to the external wall, you start to link in with the SFS systems and the Imagine system there. So that's where I think we, as sort of beyond the Cineat brand, but now when we talk about the ETEX, our parent company, and the brands that we offer, I think we're one of the few manufacturers that can bring all those elements together and sort of deal with the issues associated with each of those components as they come together in a robust technical design.
Very much part of the Morrell Day report was around that building as a system, wasn't it?
Very much so.
Wait, where does the CCPI fit into this for you, Nigel?
CCPI, we've adopted it.
I should say that's the Code for Construction Products Information. I've gone straight in with acronyms.
Yes, So we I think it's clearly been recognised from the Morrell Day report on construction products, and when you start to look at the green paper on construction product reform in terms of some of the deficiencies we have within, let's call it, construction product legislation, and I think one of the problems is the market integrity, is the lack of consistency. There's no standardisation of the way we present data to the marketplace. We subscribed to the CCPI. We went initially with our non-load bearing petition systems. We've now extended that offering there, and it gave great insight, because no matter how good you think you are, it's always great to have someone to look at your business from an independent standpoint. And we found it very beneficial. And certainly from the CCPI process, we were able to put certain new processes in place, but also to improve on our existing process. In fact, we're now going through the first stage of renewal of it. So no, it's been very beneficial to us. I think there needs to be greater take up by the wider industry. I think we talk about something like 25,000 product manufacturers in the UK. And there's relatively few have joined the CCPI yet. So I think it's on the cusp. I personally have found it highly beneficial. It's made us look in the mirror. It's made us improve what we're doing now. And certainly our systems, our processes, in terms of the control of our data and the production of our data and the communication of our data to the marketplace, have definitely got better as an outcome of CCPI.
The important thing is it's these silos, isn't it? We test it over here, but we market it over there. And it's bringing these things together so that the conversations we're having about a product are very much linked to the way that we test them. And there's a honesty and integrity brought it. It's really a process all about driving honesty and integrity.
It's interesting that there's a language which has crept into construction. There's a vocabulary of words that we use in terms of sort of moisture resistant and high impact and all these types of terms of fireproof, or all these quite nebulous terms. What does it actually mean? And I think what we've done, we've created our own sets of terminology now, so we have much more consistency in what we do. But I think the critical thing is anything we claim is backed up, and we've just as part of support for that, we've just introduced our new product information management system within the business now. So now that helps us now internally get consistency. So out of our central product information management system, we now drive all our collateral. So whether it's our websites, our technical data sheets, our brochures, etc. So what you've now got is absolute consistency going to the marketplace. And this is all about coming from some of those challenges that came from the CCPI process, from the initial audits, the challenge of how do you do that? And they kept pressing, and it got us thinking about, yes, we could do this better. And certainly, as I've said, we've definitely improved our processes.
Did you think the CCPI sort of drove you into the design, or is the CCPI supporting the design? Because again, it seems to be breaking down, because design's about product and content.
I think they're two separate things. But I think, ultimately is, how you present your data, it's critical in terms of the consistency there, and it just underpins it. It helps you risk mitigate yourself. Yeah. If you've got good product testing, good system testing, you've got your product testing, your system testing presented in an appropriate, clear, consistent manner, and then that's then delivered to the marketplace by competent people. You've got all the building blocks in place, and the next thing is along that is to follow from that is that position with regard to taking design liability.
I'm going to dip back into some detail again, Nigel, and then we'll wrap up by talking about the future. But one of the things, again, one of the questions that's come through is that we've got before the statement and after the statement, right? So we've got what we were doing and what we are doing, and of course, construction is never binary, right? So we've got projects in train as your new offering came in. So our projects and information issued prior to the statement on the 19th of July covered by the statement, and sort of residual to that, what happens to project packs that are still in design, projects not on site prior to the announcement? How does this?
So again, we have a cut-off date, and we've decided a particular date. We're after a particular date, then absolutely that's covered by design liability. What we strongly encourage that people who projects or project packs that have been produced before that point of time, bring them back into the system. We can review them, we can edit them, we can reissue them, and then that reissue version, which is then dated, that revision is post-dated after the issue of the design liability, that will be covered by the design liability position. Okay.
Yeah, so really it's a case of have a conversation with you to work out where you're at, what you can do from where you were at that point.
I think, yes, we have a light in the sand in terms of a date. Have we fundamentally changed what we've done in terms of producing a project pack from day one to day two? Could have design liability? No, we haven't. But I think it's just good measure to check. I think also, as I said, we've been going through this very extensive process of testing, of converting across from British Standard testing to EN testing there. And often we produce a project pack, and that project pack, that project, for whatever reason, could be put on hold for a year, 2 years, 3 years. So my advice would always be, before you start that project, talk to your specification manager, have that project pack review. There could be a case of some of the systems that were in that original project pack 3 years ago are no longer systems that we support there. We would then update the systems with the relevant new EN systems backed by the classification reports, and then you'd have your design liability cover on the back end of that as well.
So if we sort of recap a little bit, what this offering does is extends the traditional warranty offering that Cineac used to.
I think in simplistic terms, the traditional warranty, which is offered by Cineac, is offered by a lot of the manufacturers in this sector, very much covers the product or a product defect, or it actually covers the fact that those products that are used to create a system, that those products correctly installed within that system will deliver that stated system performance. But buildings are not individual elements. Buildings are items or elements that come together. And so the difference is with the design liability is we're taking responsibility for the coupling of those elements together. That is the fundamental difference there.
And again, I think so. The other aspect of this now is that there's when working with Cineac, we have a clearer design process, so that we will be able to, I guess, moving forward over time, start to have clearer gateways within our own projects to say we can't start the design until we have all of this information in place. And also a completed design is all of this information. Because again, I think one of the things that the design process struggles with, we don't really have standards to say, with respect to dry lining, what is a completed stage 3, or what do we need at completed stage 3, and what is a completed stage 4? So clarity of process I see as a key.
I think this clarity of process and design, I think there's lots of clarity of process required at the present time. As we talk about competence statements, what is an appropriate competence statement? I produce statements as a designer. So we are feeling our way. We are trying to work out the needs of the marketplace and service the needs of the market. Be great if there was more guidance on this. And I think there's a lot of different parties are working, particularly on the competency agenda, but the pace is quite low. And if anything, the competency concerns probably lie more with the installer than with the manufacturer. So I think if anything at the present time, the manufacturers are probably being deprioritized in terms of competence guidance there. That's why we're taking the initiative and we're learning from it.
I think again, but I think that sort of failure of clear process makes that competency in the middle bit quite difficult. So you've got the manufacturer over here with a very clear role to make stuff. You've got the installer over here with very clear competency requirements to install stuff. There's the bit in the middle, which is who makes the decisions and how decisions are made, and I think that's probably the most complex bit of competence, because again, we don't have one process, and often people would be wearing different hats depending on the size of the project, the size of the business. And again, I'm hoping through this that process will become more clearly defined by Siniat putting a line in the sand and saying, we're doing that bit.
And I think, yes, I think we will state our claim to the piece that we do. I'm really hoping that the work that we do is not in isolation. I'm really hoping that the sort of the actions, the initiatives that we've taken drives improvement to the wider industry. I'll be very happy, for other sort of suppliers of products and systems also take on the same initiative. But I think then we have a much stronger position for construction products and systems in the marketplace.
I think that's an important point again, isn't it? That we're here, what you're offering is a step forward, but it's not yet the solution, because as we said prior, there's 50% of stuff is sort of relatively easy to design within the systems available, but we also know that our systems are constantly being stretched by designs. We're constantly being stretched by interfacing with multiple different things. The curtain wall system, the glazed partition, the door. It is a much more complex package than I think people really gave credit going into all of this.
I think it is much more complex, but I think actually it probably is not totally definitive. But there's a high. We can give a high level of definition to what we do at the present time. We know there's going to be openings for services. We know there's going to be openings for doors. We know there's going to be openings for glazed screens. We know there's going to be deflection detail requirements. So there are known things that are going to take place. I think we can now start to look at standardizing the design of those, building those into our project pack. So automatically we almost give before asked. They become a standard part of our offering rather than just a straightforward, this is a wall. We bring together all the other components or facets that need to be looked at in constructing a wall.
And I think, again, that's the key, isn't it? So being able to exert more influence on the design process to bring more control to how those decisions are made. And I think the flip side of that, and I'm maybe putting words into your mouth here, but once we start to take things outside of the project, so you deal with a design problem that's difficult, knotty, hard, and we maybe don't have the information available at the time, but you're capturing that, you're learning from it, and that will inform the development of future systems.
100%. What we're doing now in our project packs, the scope of our project packs compared to what we did 5 to 10 years ago is completely different. And I'd say the beauty now, with the Cinia is that we can start to bring in the interfacing, for example, on the steel protection with ProMat, with the fast stopping for FSI, on the SFS with Reimagine, we can start to bring those elements together as part of our standardized offering. But certainly, I think as every day goes by, as every week goes by, we're tackling problems. We have a list. We have a list of things that need to be done. I'd love to get them quicker, but there's a pace we can work at. And of course, the market conditions dictate often the pace at which you can work on things. But that list still gets smaller, and we come back to the 50-50, the 80-20. I'd like to think that we will get to a point where 80% of the design is done at the right stage, at REBA stage 3 into detailed design stage 4, and only 20% then is that residual bit, which is down to the uniqueness of the individual sites. But I think we don't stop at that. We just keep going. We keep looking for the problems, and we keep trying to solve the problems there, and just push more and more of that into that upfront detailed design there, and then really sort of insisting then or ensuring that the contractors build to what has been specified up front there. Then I think we're going to get a much better building coming out of this process.
So fast forward 5 years, are we 10 years away from the solution? Is it?
I don't think it's that long. I personally think we're probably 2 to 3 years away before we can really get to that point where we take much greater control, where the manufacturer is taking that control of that design and be able to offer the design professionals solutions to most of the common problems there. I think from some workshops I've done recently, some architectural workshop, it's quite clear that we're doing the right things. That the message always is we want more and we want it quicker. But there's a pace at which we can actually work at and integrate that, build into our systems, but also to communicate it, to get it to the marketplace. Because I think whilst we develop things technically, the critical thing is making sure that the information is passed in the right format. We talk about data integrity and data format through to the marketplace there. And again, that's what we're doing now. And so going forward now in terms of your MBS now, in terms of your Cineac systems on MBS there, that also supported by all your classification reports. You've got complete evidence there. So we're really just looking at that, that building that golden thread, getting you ready for Gateway 2. But a lot of focus on Gateway 2 now, but don't forget Gateway 3 will come. And it's about making sure you're at Gateway 2, and then the information feed throughout the build program. So when you come to Gateway 3, this is what we actually did. It's all there ready. So by working continuously down that chain from Gateway 2 to Gateway 3, it should make then the whole completion process much easier at the end of it. What you don't want to do is create another Gateway 2 information build type scenario at that point there. You've got to work along that stream.
And I think that gateway approach that the regulators have put in place for higher risk buildings, I think one of the things that's really important for everyone to understand is the building safety regulations don't just apply to high risk buildings. And the expectation is that that sort of gateway approach of making sure we've completed it before we move to the next stage, the principle of that really should be applying to all projects.
And we're seeing that now.
Yeah.
We're genuinely seeing it now, that a lot of the questions we're being asked, you'd say they're more of an HRB type question, but actually it's not an HRB. As you say, it's implicit. This is not just for HRBs. This is for all buildings. So I do think there's a greater responsibility being taken by the overall design community, and the design community is a very broad community, but there is much more responsibility being taken now, not just on HRBs, but on anything which involves fire or the structural sufficiency or structural integrity of buildings.
And again, I think the lesson that can be learned from this is the new regulation is about duty. So it's about gateways, it's about duty, and people being very clear what they're responsible for, and then making sure that they can demonstrate that they're competent to manage that responsibility.
It's interesting. It's a good question. It's interesting because most recently I've been asked to complete a designer competency statement. I've never done one of those before. And these are there were some very, very probing questions in terms of what do we do and how do we educate our people, and about the different building regulations, etc. And so I really see the role of Cineac is fundamentally changing. We're not producing just selling products. We're not just selling systems. We're much more now integral to the overall design process there. And it helps me look at how I develop and educate and the competence in my people now, and I start to look at the needs, the increasing needs of the marketplace, that will then further help me develop and design my competence pathways going forward.
So the process itself is helping to improve the business.
Absolutely. This is, we're on a journey. Yeah, and I think, you asked me a question, how long? I think some of those fundamentals in the next 2 to 3 years, but we'll always be on a journey. I think construction will continue to evolve. Designers will continue to be innovative, and we will have to chase the designer to make sure that they've got robust technical solutions to meet their innovative design requirements.
Well, listen, thank you, Nigel. That's exhausted my questions, but I'm pretty sure it hasn't exhausted the questions that the rest of the industry have. And I think it's fair to say that this is the start of a conversation with the marketplace, and you'd welcome additional questions to be asked. And
absolutely, and we welcome challenge. We try our best. Possibly don't always get it right. But certainly, if there are more questions which come off the back of this webinar, we're more than happy to respond to individuals and to address it. Yeah, very, very much so. Very much so.
It's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you for your time, Ian. Thank you.